Sandy Says Read. Welcome to the channel. Tonight we are going to do a review of Rex Draconis, Lords of the Dragon Moon. This is book 2 in the Rex Draconis series by Richard Knack. And let me give you the specifications. It's 252 pages, published in 2018 by Hydra Publications. Like I said, it's book 2 in the series. I did the review of book 1, 2 weeks ago. I'll put a link to that in the drop-down box below so you can go check that out because we'll probably make a couple of references to that here. I'm going to read you the back cover. As the Shatter's fiery influence spreads from across the sky and Arian seeks to recover from the Weir attack, events unfold that force the Minotaur Wrath and his surviving crew to remain in the port. However, as Wrath turns his attention to hunting down the assassin who worked for the dread of Fafnir, he, the knight Eric, and the elven mystic Caldera, and others discover themselves caught up in a fantastic plot to subvert the very will of the gods and create new lords to rule over all Tiberos. But some of the gods have taken notice. Now, what's happening in this book is the Fafnir, who survived the first book, they're sort of banding together because they would like to ascend to godlike status. One Fafnir in particular, his name is Codon, he has a chunk, a piece of the old moon. So he's got this thing, and it's a little dangerous. He's got this thing, and he needs to use it to create the portal that he needs to ascend. And he's convinced the other Fafnir that they can ascend with him, but really he's using them, right? He's a bad guy. So let's see. He thinks he can trick and control the other Fafnir, and he's doing a pretty good job of it. But once again, there's lots of twists and turns and duplicitous characters in here. So while Codon thinks that he's the one doing the manipulating, there's someone else manipulating him. And it's wonderful the way that, can you hear my neighbors racing the streets outside? Yeah. Anyway, it's wonderful the way those extra duplicitous characters jump in there and just throw the plot twists in. The character Caldera, whom I just really liked from the first book as well, she's that full elf, and she was experiencing visions, right? And she thought she was having these visions from a good source. The Lady of the Lands, who is like the goddess for the elves, Caldera thought she was getting visions from her or from a source like her, when in fact it was the Lady of the Land's brother, the god of chaos, who's giving her these visions. And that's a bad, bad thing because the visions were misleading. So as Caldera was misled, she was misleading the other characters around her. I mean, they're just going down all the wrong paths. And I mean, that comes to just a climax of just bad, awful things. So very well done. This is very well done. If you track along with all those things happening, it gets to that point where you're just like, there's so much suspense going on that you're like, oh, for the love of God. One of these characters needs to catch a break. But I do want to say that friendship wins in the end. I was so pleased when I realized that was what saved the day. Friendship. The character Esk, who is a dwarf that I mentioned from the first book, he's got dementia. I mean, he's one of those characters that's just extremely absent-minded. He does all this tinkering and building and inventing, but he wouldn't stop and think to remember to feed himself, right? So his friend, the Quillum named Hilna, is the one who thinks of, okay, you need to eat now. You should be eating something. She's the one who has money to go to the tavern to buy food to feed him, right? She takes care of him. She protects him. But there's a scene in here that I'm going to read for you where Esk realizes that Hilna has been, he thinks she's being harmed. She's been kidnapped. She's like in another cavern, and the bad guy is pretending to be Hilna. He has assumed her form so that he can give directions to Esk, right? And that's what we have happening right here. Let's see. How delightful, a high-pitched voice said behind him. That's so clever. He looked behind him. Much better than bolts where possible, I always say. Esk fumbled at his forehead, then asked, Have you seen my magnifying lenses, Hilna? They're sticking out of your uppermost pocket. Oh yes, so they are. The dwarf pulled out the lenses, which he had connected to one another with a wire frame. It made for much easier use. All he had to do was set the sidebars over his ears and rest the centerpiece on the bridge of his nose. Once the frame was in place, Esk adjusted the 6 lenses in order to obtain the best magnification and sensitivity. As he did, he glanced at the quillum. Only the quillum was no longer standing there. Instead, a tall, thin figure clad in a dark cloak and hood loomed over the dwarf. Grunting in surprise, Esk instinctively backed away. In the process, he knocked the frame off his nose, giving himself a blurry view of the world as the lenses shifted. Is something wrong? Hilna asked. The dwarf immediately readjusted the frame, and then the lenses. He stared at his companion, who this time looked completely normal. Is something wrong? She asked again. Now he pretends that everything is just fine, everything's great, he gets back to work, but he realizes something's a little bit up, something's a little bit wrong. Well, what he does with that information is he sabotages the machine he's making. I mean, he's not an idiot. He doesn't have all the dementia that we think he might have, so he sabotages the machine. Of course, that comes into play at a climactic moment, and we realize that he did that because he didn't want them harming his friend. And he says, toward the end, he explains, they were hurting Hilna, and nobody hurts Hilna. Nobody harms my friend. Well, it was because of that friendship. That friendship like broke through his dementia. That friendship broke through the cloud of busyness that this dwarf always has toward his inventions and toward his tinkering. He cared about his friend, and because of that, he saved the day. I mean, we have powers converging in some cavern. We have all these characters in this huge climax of all this suspense and all this crazy stuff of duplicitous characters misleading others and crazy twists and turns, and it all comes down to the power of friendship. That is amazing. I loved it. It was great. I highly recommend Rex Draconis, Lords of the Dragon Moon by Richard Knack. Now, I want to mention this character, Willen, I wrote it down, Wellen Oak is the druid. Remember in the first review of the first book, I mentioned there was this character in the first chapter, and I was really concerned about him. I was worried for his safety, and we see him in the first chapter, and he sets up this chase by these undead creatures that are after him, and we see those undead creatures just harassing our main characters throughout this novel, throughout the narrative. And then Wellen does appear again, later in the book, he does appear again, and he gets to help at saving the day. So I was very pleased to see Wellen come back because I think I love him. That might be all, you guys. Great book. I highly recommend it. There are, I think, 2 more books in the Rex Draconis series. 2 more. I could look up. Are they listed in here? I will list them in the drop-down box below for you guys. I highly recommend the series. It's lots of twists and turns and cool characters to keep track of. Wonderful stuff. That's all for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure that you like and subscribe and follow and all that good stuff on these channels so that you always know when the random stuff is happening.